Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
You're listening to Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. Here's one of our favorite conversations about what's happening in the city.
Sam Ghani first started photographing Milwaukee musicians and concerts back in 2016. By 2019, he was a full-time photographer and had become as much of a fixture in the local music scene as the artists he was capturing. From Brandi Carlile to Buffalo Nichols, Ghani has thousands of images that capture the magic of live music in venues of all sizes. His new photo book, Memories of a Street Cat, is dedicated to this formative chapter of his life. The photo book, published by Daybreak Magazine, features almost 400 photos of concert pictures and artist portraits, along with commentary from the artists. Ghani joins me now to share more about how his first photo book came together.
The idea was tossed around about 3 years ago, and I finally got to work on it within the last 2 years. Or Tommy Moore, the publisher and producer of the book, got to work on it with me over the last 2 years. And it feels surreal. It feels surreal that it's like something physical is coming out of like so much time of work.
Why did you feel this was the right time or perhaps the right subject to put this out?
Yeah, I think I'm just growing as an artist, as a professional, as a person, and I don't shoot live music as much as I did when I was much younger. And thinking about the book, I realized I'm not even the same person that I was when I started shooting, and I think this is a great way for me to not necessarily close a chapter, but honor a part of the journey that got me to where I am as an artist and as a Milwaukeean, as someone who advocates for art and culture here. So it's a really cool way to just kind of say goodbye to something that I used to do every day.
Yeah, what would you say the ratio is now of like capturing live performances versus when it was pretty much the bread and butter, right? It just kind of snowballed into this was your main beat?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it went from 100% to now it's probably like 25% of what I shoot or less a lot of times. And I wish I could just hang out at the club every night, and shoot, but my back hurts.
It is a lot
I'm
of
getting
standing,
old.
a lot of moving. Well, and you've attended and shot so many performances, and I imagine it was hard to narrow it down, but to name a few of the artists featured in this book, we have Sister Strings, Brandi Carlile, Charmer, Diet Life, Buffalo Nichols, Death Cab for Cutie, Classic. There's so many more. With all the shows, I'm sure all the thousands and thousands of images, how did you even begin to narrow down what you wanted to highlight in Memories of a Street Cat?
Well, that was a lot of me leaning on Tommy to be very objective in choosing the artists and some of the best shots. I did select a handful of artists, specifically myself, and then I had those artists be interviewed by Matt Wild of Milwaukee Record. And that was a really interesting way of me overlapping multiple forms of Milwaukee art together, like music, and then Tommy with the physical photo book, my images, and then Matt Wild, who very early on in my career would use my photos for their publication. So outside of me choosing some of those artists that were interviewed by Matt Wild, Tommy did a great job of choosing artists and shots that made the most sense or were cohesive and created a little bit of a narrative within the book.
Yeah, it's hard when you're so wrapped up into your work, right? Like I can relate to editing down an infinite hole. There's no way to pull
Absolutely.
out.
And after so many years, it was so many photos and I have my own bias, right? Like I have interpersonal relationships with all these people and I felt it was necessary to have a third party, to have Tommy Moore really take an objective stance and take the time transparently to sift through thousands of photos to see what made the most sense. So I'm really grateful for his patience in that process. It's something I just admittedly couldn't have done myself.
Is there something that didn't make it into the book that you're still thinking about or is a highlight for you?
There's a handful of artists, and I don't want to say who just to stay completely clean and fair, but there's a handful of artists where I'm like, damn, our paths crossed more than once, and they did deserve a spot in this book. But there were a few personal concessions that I had to make just as mementos to myself, like Death Cab for Cutie, like you said, shooting them at Summerfest, or there's Angels and Airwaves, which is a huge part of me as an artist, and that section's probably not going to matter a lot to most of like the viewers, especially the viewers who are there to consume the Milwaukee media part, but that it's such an important chapter of my journey and full circle moment for me as a music lover and as a working artist. So there's a lot of little Easter eggs in the book too. And I just had to sacrifice space. Like the book could only be so big.
Well, and it's still an impressive book and lineup. It's 200 plus pages. And to kind of talk about either the Easter eggs or some of the shots in there, I would love to talk about how your brain works when you're on site doing these projects. How do you work in quote unquote concert mode when you're there to capture photos? Like, do you still find ways to take in the whole experience and be present with the music being played, especially if it's an artist that you're a fan of and that means so much to you? How do you navigate both sides of your brain?
Yeah, I think a lot of photographers or videographers can probably relate that I've seen too much of production, that I'm almost more interested in what's happening on and behind stage than the entire experience itself. Especially at bigger theaters like the Paps, for instance, there's so much going on. There's so many people working behind the stage, and I end up becoming a part of that mix when I'm shooting bigger shows. But my brain really churns off when I'm shooting. I go into the hunt and I get really narrow scoped and I don't hear things and see things, and I'm just paying attention to the intuition. Is something about to happen? The song is building. The artists are moving in a way that they weren't before, so they're obviously about to do something. Like that's kind of those calculations are running at milliseconds in my brain. And then if it's an artist that I really care about, like Buffalo Nichols, Garden Home, Sister Strings Classic, I'll take a moment to enjoy one song. And like a light switch, I can just churn it off and be present as a music enjoyer, and then turn it right back on as the song's ending and keep hunting.
With concert photography, I imagine it's one of the most difficult things to be assigned because the lighting changes constantly. And you write a little bit about using low light to your advantage. Can you share more about that process?
Yeah, when I first started shooting, I think having to deal with grainy, low light photos was a part of the limitations of the equipment that I had at the time. So, like any artist, I did my best to solve for those problems. And I spent a lot of time second shooting weddings during this era too, which a lot of wedding venues are very low lit. You can't just start setting up lights in the middle of a wedding and you have to make do, right? So I think I owe a lot to my younger self of having to creatively solve for all of that. And just like a cat at night, I thought it was a great parallel as a cat dad myself, as an animal lover. When a cat is using low light to its advantage, I did so much of that during concert photography and wedding photography. And you know, there's something important to me about not interrupting the experience of the viewer, whether it is at a wedding or at a concert. So I tend not to use flash. Not that I think it's a bad idea to use flash at shows, but I tend not to use flash. Again, I couldn't afford a quality flash when I first started shooting, so it was a part of that limitation as well. And then it just became a part of like my style and my brand. And now when I shoot even the biggest shows, I can adapt to the really good lighting in a way that I may not have been able to if I didn't go through the cutting my teeth phase of my journey.
You mentioned earlier that Matt Wild of Milwaukee Record interviewed some of the artists that are featured in the book. How did it make you feel to read some of those for the first time?
I've only read them once because it was a pretty overwhelming feeling. And I don't know if musicians feel this way about when their record's done. I bet a lot of them are going to disagree with this and say that they listened to the record 1,000 times before it released. But I could only, after I proofed the final copy of the digital copy of the book, I looked at that a lot to make sure that it was ready to be printed. But once I got the physical media and I knew that it was right and that it was ready to be sold, it was really hard to read it because it was a really overwhelming experience. As an artist, I don't get the opportunity to stop and talk to artists that I work with about how it feels for them to work with me. We're always thinking about the next thing and the next thing, or what's happening in the moment. And it's kind of a very vulnerable question to ask too, which is why I'm grateful that Matt got to ask it on my behalf. it made it a lot easier for me to include. So I haven't given a lot of time to those quotes, but I think as the months go by post release, it's going to be something that I can continue to reflect on. And as I get farther away from music photography, I think it'll be a really cool thing to remind myself like the impact that I left with some of these people.
So, with concert photography being your first big artistic chapter here in Milwaukee, how do you reflect on this growth looking back and compiling it for this book? And what do you hope people take away from your journey?
I think looking back on it, I realized how little I had when I started. I was working part-time at the mall when I was shooting shows and weddings, and it was me chipping away at something that I didn't know was so grandiose. I didn't really think I was at the summit of a Mount Everest. I thought I was chipping away at rocks on the beach for fun. And it only became a Mount Everest when I allowed it to, when I saw that it could be. And if there's really anything to take away from the book or my journey and some of the things that I've shared as Easter eggs along the way, it's your hobbies don't have to be hobbies, and your passions are just that. They can define you and they can take you all across the world if you let them, if you're patient enough with yourself, if you're open to collaborating, and if you're open to needing help. I think we all need help when we're following our dreams. And they take time. It took me over 10 years to get to this point, and a lot of that was learning, and I think a lot of failure. I think a lot of people don't understand how much failure goes into success. It's almost every day of failure until you reach that one day of success. And I think as long as you can be honest with yourself and keep picking yourself back up, it's so cliche, but anything is possible.
Memories of a Street Cat officially comes out on March 25th, and you're having a launch party at Cactus Club, which of course means a lot to you. Can you share more about this event?
Yeah, yeah. All the artists on the bill: Living Room, El Sebas, Known Moons, Garden Home, and Classic are all dear friends of mine. I believe in them as artists, as a part of the future of Milwaukee music. The show is free to attend because I started shooting artists for free, and I thought it made sense to close this chapter the same way that it began. I'm paying the artist, but you don't have to. And I think that there's something really special for me about that. Cactus Club is where I cut my teeth, in one of the places that I first started shooting live music. I'm the vice president of Cactus Plus, the arts nonprofit, the sister organization of Cactus Club. The place really does mean a lot to me, and it laid the groundwork for me being a working artist. So it just made sense for me to host it there.
Well, Samer, I want to congratulate you on such a momentous occasion, and I'm really glad a lot of your work is just going to be physically accessible in this format. It's a big deal, so I hope you feel the love from the community.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I really appreciate it.
Samer Ghani is a Milwaukee-based photographer and filmmaker. His new photo book, Memories of a Street Cat, comes out tomorrow with a release party at Cactus Club at 7 p.m. featuring 5 local bands. It's free, and you can find more information at wuwm.com.
That was the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast. It comes from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. Lake Effect is WUWM's talk show all about what's happening in the city. If you want to hear more conversations like this, subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast, and you'll hear highlights from the show. If you want to hear the full show, it's on the radio at noon, Monday through Friday, on 89.7.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.